for joining me today. I have my friend Jim Fuhs here, and he is a brilliant guy, has a really incredible background, both in the military, marketing, video. He's a really interesting guy. I'm really excited to have him on today's episode and looking forward to all the insights he has to share. Jim, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, Valerie, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. Great to get to hang out with you. Like we were saying before we started recording here, we could probably talk for hours because you're just a very interesting person as well, and always learn from you as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, we've met. Jim and I met at a few different conferences over the past few years. Running into each other all over the country, even though we live very opposite corners of the country ourselves. And it's just fun to see the virtual space allowing us to reconnect regularly, whether it's just in a social media post or it's something in real time like this. So really excited. Why don't you give people who may not know you just a little bit of your background, where you come from, how you got into marketing, what are you doing now to serve people in the marketing space?
That sounds like a great place to start. I'm actually, as I like to say, a first generation American. My mom is actually from Lima, Peru, and came here in the 60s. Met my dad, who was in the Navy at the time, and so I was born in Indiana. They moved to Virginia, grew up there, played soccer. And that was like becoming a big thing back in the 70s and 80s. I'm kind of telling my age there. And but then I had this crazy idea when I was graduating high school that I was going to join the Marines instead of going straight to college because I needed a break. And so I started out in the reserves, but I went to Paris Island in South Carolina, went to boot camp and had all that fun summer. And then started college, ROTC at Old Dominion University. And then I got commissioned in 89 and I had a double major in business finance and management when I graduated. And I was just 3 hours short of a minor in economics. So I was always into the whole business thing. Wanted to actually be an infantry officer in the Marines, but didn't work out the way they assigned things. I ended up in financial management, but I made the best of it. We had our company commander when we go through this thing called the basic school, which is like 6 months of initial training, that said that we were all infantry officers TAD to our MOSs. So I kind of always kept that mindset of that I was supporting the war fighter. And I was lucky that I always got assignments that were in direct support of those type of organizations. And one of those, I guess, little fun facts I like to tell people is I was actually one of the founding fathers, if you want to call it that, of the Marine Special Operations Command in 2006. And so I was the guy in charge of all the millions of dollars that we spent. And I got to travel with the general to Tampa a lot. And I have things that I learned about that I can never talk about, or I have to do bad things to those people. And I get in a lot of trouble too.
Wow.
Yes, I retired in 2009 as a lieutenant colonel, but I'd always been into tech. Like I was the guy that the neighbors like, hey, can you replace my modem card? Can you do this and that? So I always had been into tech. And so when I retired, uh, it's like, what am I going to do now? Right. It's like, I gotta grow up. And so I started out in doing government contract consulting because that's what I had finished my career up doing some contracting work. But it wasn't like one of those things where you wake up every day and it's like, I want to go write another government contract. That was not what I wanted to do. And so I started to see these people in about the 2013, 14 timeframe. They're starting to do this thing called social media. And I started to look at what they were doing for people on like Facebook. And I'm like, that doesn't look that hard. And so I started to teach myself. And then I actually joined Kim Garst had a program way back then. And I started learning from her. I got onto Google Plus and I was in a networking group. And one of the guys in my group, I said, hey, would you let me do your social media? It's like, yeah. So that's how I started, just by, diving in and, charging very little money at the time. That's one
Right.
of the things you learn as a
Isn't
business
that how we
owner.
all start?
Yeah. It's like, would you just give me $25 an hour? I'd be happy to do this for you. And they're like, sure. And then later you're like, boy, was I dumb. But it
I
was a
think
good learning
it.
experience. Um, and so then, you know, I started to go to social media marketing world, first as an attendee in 2018, and that's actually where I met Kelly Noble Mirabella and learned about this whole thing, this live video thing that was happening. And so, as much as I had, I was even doing workshops for a couple community colleges and things of that nature. It was like, okay, Facebook is telling us, right? All these platforms tell us what they want us to do, but we tend to not want to listen to them and do what we think is going to work and then wonder why it doesn't work. But they said, we want you to go live with video. So Kelly had set up a Facebook Live challenge group. I joined it, so I kind of got over that fear of video, right? Can you believe I
Yeah.
had a fear of video? I did.
Oh,
And I think we all do. I think if we're
yeah.
honest, we all start out that way. And then I was on watching a friend's show, and I had started to do, remember Instagram TV when that was a thing? And so I had done a few episodes, and she asked, is anybody doing Instagram TV? And I was in the audience and said, oh, I am. And of course, you could share the link. So she had me come on to the show, and we talked, and Tim Sohn was in the audience. And so then he reached out to me. He's like, hey, I'd like to interview you. And then, one thing led to another. And then we started doing the Tim and Jim show in August of 2018. And we've now been doing that for over 4 years. So I started doing,
Wow.
weekly video. And trust me, if you go back and look at some of our earlier videos, you'll see it gives everyone hope because we were not that good. And I think that's important that people need to realize that,
Yeah.
right? It's just like everything else. You got to practice and you got to practice. And so it's fascinating in a way because, then I got involved with Toastmasters, started working on my speaking skills because I think, you know, one of the things that we see, especially today, is that there's always going to be change and you have to be prepared to, and I don't like the word pivot, I say shift. And so the fact that I had been doing this live streaming and my business, I completely almost lost my business because where I was living at the time in North Carolina before I got remarried, got hit by Hurricane Florence. So my house was completely demolished by that storm, and a lot of the businesses that I had been supporting locally in North Carolina were shut down because they had physical damage or things of that nature. And so I was like, okay,
Wow.
what am I going to do now? And I was working with another friend, and she was like the web person. I was a social media person. It's like, we have to protect ourselves in the future, and we need to leverage this whole internet thing, right? There's no reason you can't
Yeah.
meet with people in other places.
Yeah.
So I ended up relocating to Atlanta in right after my wedding in October of 18, and I basically rebuilt my business. And then did another social media marketing world as a volunteer, continued to do the video, started using StreamYard, which is a great program, and just getting those reps in. Who
Mhm.
would have thought that when COVID came around, because I had been doing this for that amount of time, now people are asking me, how do I do video?
Yeah.
So I was getting a lot of client work because people were having to do everything remotely. And so learning that, figuring out how to do things better. And then lo and behold, in July of 2020, Ross Brand put out a YouTube video saying you can become an Amazon influencer. And it was like, here are the steps. And so I went and did it. And me and my friend Chris Stone, who also lives nearby here in the Atlanta area, um, I was like, "Hey, Chris, I got approved for this Amazon thing. We're going to do a show because we'd always wanted to do a show together." And that's how Dealcasters was born. And it was because I had a big following on Twitter because I did
Mhm.
not necessarily have the following maybe they would have wanted on some of the other platforms, and hadn't really started. And I can't say that I've really still completely started that YouTube journey of the march to 1,000 subscribers, but that is definitely one of the 2023 goals. But I think by learning how to use video and the importance of it, that's one of those things that I think is just going to continue to grow. Businesses need help with it, and that's where I think really it's helped me. And then my tagline is marketing the Marine Corps way because one, I've been able to adapt and overcome a lot of things, and I think as businesses, sometimes we gotta tell them the hard truth, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody is gonna like what you gotta say, but I would rather tell somebody the truth and tell them like, "Oh, everything's gonna be fine," and not everybody's gonna like you, and that's
Yeah.
okay. That's how we got to where we are today, and it's been amazing the last, I empathize with people, I really do, and I feel blessed that, God has allowed me to be successful during a time period where a lot of people struggled. Business actually grew, and has not, gone away because, people are now aware of the stuff we do because of video, because of social media, but,
Yeah.
we're also having to keep track of the changes because things that used to work don't. I mean, Facebook Live does not get the reach that it used to, and I think a lot of people have, tried to figure out, well, why is that? So maybe it's time to go on a different platform if, where is your audience really hanging out? I think those are some of those things. And then podcasts are, I think, starting to grow again. I think it kinda has gone through a weird thing, and now everybody's wanting to do video podcast, right? YouTube is now
Mhm.
rolling that out, and that'll be interesting to see how that all, works out, and what do you think of that? Even though you're asking the question.
Oh gosh. Well, I do love the fact that you said earlier that like the platforms tell you exactly what to do. Because I always use the phrasing of like, a lot of times in business people say like, focus, focus, ignore the shiny objects, don't get distracted. But in social media, the shiny objects are your clues. When there's something new and shiny that the platform puts out, they want you to try it out. They want you to play with it. They want you to be using it, and they'll reward you organically for using the new feature. So like Facebook Live, when that first came out, that was like the thing to do. And even still, you can get a lot more reach with live video than you can with recorded video. You can get a lot more reach with just video over static images. Um, when stories came out on Instagram and Facebook, and Instagram was rewarding you if you jumped over and did stories, when you went over and did reels, like all of these newer features, the platforms want you to pay attention to the new stuff. So, um, yeah, it is interesting that people, it's like we're like digging our heels in the sand of like and being dragged along. Like, why isn't this working? When if we would just jump and try what they're making very obvious to us sometimes,
Yeah, it
would
kinda
be a
go
lot
it kinda
easier.
goes back to that resistance to change, and it is true. I mean, as much as, um, I think for me, and I don't know about for you, Valerie, part of the challenge I've seen is I prefer to create longer form content with video,
Mhm.
and so trying to figure out how to get it down to that 90 seconds or less and make it meaningful, because when we things like TikTok, everybody's like, "Oh, you gotta be on TikTok," but it's like, "Do I need to be on TikTok?
Right.
Is it really gonna help my business, move the needle?" Maybe at some point, but I think if you're doing well on other platforms, it's like you said, doesn't mean you automatically abandon ship, like, "Oh, we gotta go put all our eggs here," especially if you're small.
Yeah.
I really think you have to focus on, where your clients are, and like we were talking before the show, there's a lot of stuff going on with LinkedIn, and if you're B2B, you definitely need to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I see a lot with clients. They're like, "Oh, we wanna have TikTok and this, that, and the other." And I'm like, "Okay, are your people in there? Are your people paying attention? Are your customers paying attention? Are your clients?" And so, but LinkedIn isn't always as sexy. It doesn't always feel as glitzy and glamorous, but the reach and the quality of reach is so much better for some of these businesses like that. Now, if you're selling, you know, cute sweatshirts, LinkedIn is probably not the place for you to be. Um, so you have to be really careful, depending upon what your business is, of like where you're going to focus your efforts and your attention. I do think like the authenticity piece is one that I struggle with a lot. And is sometimes why I have a hard time showing up as me, Valerie Morris, on video or even just on social in general, is just wanting to show up authentically and not come across as, I don't know what the word is. I don't want to ever come across as one of those like super prideful marketers that, is like, because there are those people out there that are just like flaunting everything that they've got and they've got it all figured out and all this. So I want to make sure that I'm coming across as like, look, I'm in the journey just as much as you are here, figuring some of the stuff out. But at the same time, I want to, have my ducks in a row too. I want to come across as educational and informative. I want to be respectful of people's time. So it's like, if I'm going to make a video, I want it to be something you get out of it too. And so that's one of the things I struggle with. And there's just some days where it just can't physically happen.
Yeah, and
There's
I
just
think
some days
yeah, I
there's
think that's
hard
a
stuff
great
going on, and honestly, there's some days where I'm so focused on running my agency and my client work that to create my own content is like I'm the cobbler with no shoes in a lot of situations because I'm so focused on doing well by my clients first, and then my stuff kind of gets pushed to the wayside.
no, I think that is so true. I mean, like, I know my website needs to be updated. I've even, gone and bought another, theme, and now it's figuring out, like, do I try to do it or do I hire someone to do it? Because websites are still important. I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes tend to forget that because that's the one thing that we own. We don't own these platforms. I mean, at the time of this recording, right, there's a bunch of stuff going on in the at least people in some minds like, oh, Twitter, has been taken over by Elon Musk. It's the end of the world. And it's like,
right.
but if it was to go away tomorrow, what would you do? And you could say the same thing about any of these other platforms. So that's where
Exactly.
the stuff that we've all said, oh, I don't need to do that right now. Oh, email marketing or writing or things that maybe aren't comfortable. I think has been a challenge. And even if you have video and now can't put it on a platform, how would you get it out there? And
Yeah.
that's like another uh, another one of those things that we can't just rest on our laurels and think everything's going to be great for forever.
Yeah. Well, it's so true. I have a friend that I met through social media marketing world actually. And she has a ton of books up on Amazon, and Amazon had some sort of dispute with her account out of nowhere and shut her whole seller account down for all of her books. It was her one spot for selling and making an income. It's just a reminder that, you are playing in rented space on all of these platforms. And so one, like diversifying your approach, I think is so important, because if one platform goes away or Twitter self implodes or whatever, you have some other channels where you've built up an audience. But also to your point of like, you own your website, um, you own your email list, and you can control how frequently and to who and all of this stuff you're going to send stuff to. Sometimes those things just don't feel as sexy, but they're so important. And a lot of people, when they think about like their social media strategy, they don't necessarily think about all these other pieces. And I've just found, being in a similar line of work of, with you, of having this kind of consultative, done for you, sometimes DIY approach with clients, is a lot of times you're going and telling them, no, you really do also need an email marketing strategy, or you need to improve your website, or you need to improve your SEO, or some of these things that I may not be a specialist at. Now, I've built many websites, don't get me wrong, but I don't sit here and type code all day long.
Right. And I
But I've
think
had to
that's
learn enough
yeah,
to tell a client, hey, this
yeah.
is what we need to do.
Yeah, I think that's so important what you bring up there because I think even in my evolution as a business, right, I was doing more of that social media management for people, but I also found some frustrations in doing that because you're relying on the client to provide you that input to be able to turn it into something. Like, I mean, even at like if you were to hire me tomorrow to do your social media, I would still like, okay, well, what is it you want me to post and what is your voice, and when do you want to be the one that's actually replying to these people? Because we may not get it right if we do it without consulting you. And so I think sometimes they think that, oh, I'm just going to hand it off and I'm going to get all this, action because someone's doing it for me. And it's not the case at all. But I also think too, what is, and I love your analogy too, right? The cobbler without the shoes is we have to do our own stuff too, because we have to see how that impacts. And sometimes when people are looking at our stuff, that's how they're also judging whether or not they may want to talk to us or hire us.
For sure. Yeah, it's this delicate balance of like how much to do or not do. And one of the other things too is like a lot of for folks like us, we're experimenting. We're seeing, my personal tendency, and maybe I'm just too old, but TikTok is not necessarily where like I'm immediately drawn. Almost every time I log on to TikTok, I'm like, oh, this is so annoying. Like, I hate the fact that and maybe I just haven't figured it out, but just the fact that it just auto starts playing all these videos. They're always so loud. And I'm like, I just want to
Right.
go look at my profile. That's what I'm going to go
Right. I
do.
just get off my lawn. It's too loud in here.
God, it's too loud. um, but and it could be just that I have young kids in the house and I'm like, they're sleeping, shh, but um, but I am on TikTok and I am working on experimenting with different types of content and things that are working or not working. Because if a client comes to me and says, hey, we want to do TikTok, I need to be able to intelligently say, well, here's some of the pros and the cons. Here's what would be good for your business versus another business. And making some of those suggestions. But if I haven't experimented, so kind of feel, as we're talking, I'm like, gosh, it's no wonder I'm so tired when it comes to Friday afternoon. There's a lot we got to keep up with, our own stuff, experimenting with the new stuff, working on tried and true strategy for our clients. There's a lot going on. Um, so yeah, it's quite the thing. And then for you to be having 2 regular live shows that you do so consistently, I just think is very impressive as well. That is something that most people, the consistency piece is one thing that a lot of people just really struggle with. So do you have
Well,
any
yeah, yeah.
tips there?
I think for me, what has been helpful is that I had, you want to call it a co-host, right? Because
Mm,
it's like we keep each other accountable. I can see where it's very easy if you're doing it on your own to all of a sudden it's like, well, this, is coming up, that's coming up. I mean, even with our December shows, right? We've kind of had a conversation. Are we gonna? Because we've never really taken a more than a week off, and
wow.
Tim had said, well, maybe I was like, look, we can't. I said we can't take a break, but if you need a break, that's okay. We'll get a guest co-host, right? That's always another good way
It's a great idea.
if somebody has something going on or needs to do some things or whatever. But consistency is what brings people back because they know, oh yeah, these people have the show, and I think that's where people with podcasting, whether it's a video podcast or audio podcast, get challenged as well because they're like, when you're, and I think sometimes it's easier to have the recorded shows because you
Hmm.
can do the batching, but when you're live, you've
Yeah.
got to set that time aside. It's built into my calendar, so I don't accidentally, schedule a, potential client call at the same time I'm supposed to have a live show. That wouldn't work out real well.
Yeah.
Uh, but there are times like maybe you get offered to do something like in my case, sometimes it might be a remote production and they're going to pay me really well. And it's like, Tim, you're either going to have to do the show on your own or we'll get a guest co-host for that week. Because
But it's
that's one of
nice
the
too. You
things.
can
Yeah.
like balance the load,
Yes.
if you, for example, if you get sick like I did this week, it's not, the show can still go on. You can
Right.
figure out a workaround.
Yeah, and even we had a situation with Dealcasters. Chris was in Europe on a pre-planned
Mm.
family vacation, and Amazon decided to have another Prime sort of thing, and so
Oh, that's
I
right.
ended up getting Jeff C and I did a show at the same time, him on his channel, us on ours, but we were able to still have a show. But I think for me too. And I am actually working on but a potential new show. Is going to be it'll be a video podcast.
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
still trying to decide whether I want to do it live or if I'm going to record it. And that's going to be more on just the whole world of uh, video, right? Create, because
Mm,
there's all these different live streaming platforms that, could be talking to the people about, and just what are the pros and cons, because each one has its
yeah.
own unique thing. But it's going to be me and the guest. I'm not planning to have a co-host, as I have done, because I think, sometimes we just want to trying different things.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of one of my goals here in the next few weeks to get launched. And actually Chris has been kind of encouraging me to do that. And
Cool.
so I think, um but yeah, I enjoy doing, this. I enjoy being interviewed by people. In fact, that's another thing I would tell you. If you Chris and I have talked about this, and when he interviews people that potentially want to, have their own podcast, have their own show, do you realize what you're getting yourself into, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be just as beneficial or more powerful to you to just be a guest,
Right.
because the reality is, like when you were on the Tim and Jim show, it's not about me and Tim, it's about our
Right.
guests.
Exactly.
And so if you have a guest, if you're having a show and you're bringing a guest on because you want to have a show, but then you try to take over, that's going people are going to see that, right?
Oh, for
The,
sure.
the
Yep.
the reason to have a show is to highlight your guest, not to highlight you. I mean, it's okay, right? You do a little bit of that so people know what you do, but when you're a guest, you're able to explain more about what you do. And so I think sometimes some of these people, like I'll say, especially maybe people in the coaching space, would be, more beneficial going out, using a product like Podmatch and
Right.
finding people that want to interview them about what their specific niche is, as opposed to, I'm going to have my own show, because then they got to
Yeah.
produce it, or they got to get a producer. And then they say, wait, it costs how much to have you produce the show? It's more than $25 an hour, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah. Man. Well, so you are obviously very experienced in not just what you're doing for clients, but all of these different shows. You got a good pulse on like what's happening right now. Um, if you were to give somebody listening today advice on just, hey, here's one simple thing to go do today to go hit your next marketing win or to get a quick win today, what advice would you tell somebody?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First of all, I think sometimes we get too wrapped up in creating content. And
Hmm.
I think one of the best things you can do is just engage on the platforms as yourself. Help, whether you're on LinkedIn or whatever, and say, for example, you see somebody post something about something that you're an expert at, put your 2 cents in, but don't also try to be, take over, because people will notice that. And they're like, wow, that Valerie Morris, she really knows some stuff. I need to talk to her. I need to reach
Yeah.
out to her. And I think engagement is one of the most overlooked things when it comes to uh, growing your business with social, right? People think, and in fact, I like to use the opposite term too, is I feel like there's too many broadcasters.
Oh, sure.
They just
Yeah.
they just throw stuff out there. Look at what I did. Look at me. Look at me. And then when people even comment, they don't even respond back. And
Yeah.
and so I see that a lot on Twitter. You can tell, like, a lot of times if someone has a lot of followers but doesn't follow a lot of people back, realistically, that's just their broadcast channel. They're
Yeah.
not really engaging with their audience. So I think that's a
Hmm.
big thing. And I learned that from a good friend of mine, Jeff Sheehan, who's got, like, 6 figures of followers on Twitter. But he's one that I was like, I never thought of it that way. But it's a good point. Even
Yeah.
if you were to make a compliment to some big name person, they don't always come back and say, "Oh, thanks for commenting," or something like that. So I think that's important. But then with
Yeah.
video, I think even just starting, as simple as with your cell phone, and of course the phones now are, I guess, I don't know, maybe we should call them smartphones. Maybe cell phones is too old school because they're so much smarter than a cell phone. Uh,
Right.
Recording that video and, using it as a reel or something else. I have been amazed and surprised, and this goes back to your earlier comment, Valerie, about how, you and I do too as well, struggle of like, I don't know, it's like being yourself, but it's like, how much do I really want to share?
Yeah.
I mean, because I think sometimes depending on, whatever circumstances in life, we not all of us are like these big shares that want to share everything. There's some people that overshare. But I was surprised with some of my reels, whereas like as an example, just finishing the Marine Corps Marathon a couple weeks ago, when I did a reel talking about like, hey, I just got done with a run and I'm just talking, and I maybe shared some other lesson in there. And I would get thousands of views on that
Yeah.
reel. Then I
Wow.
do a reel about business and I get like 50.
Yeah. People do love to see the real life, that's for sure.
Yeah. But I think getting comfortable with video by just, start out with your phone. Don't feel like you got to
Yeah.
spend thousands of dollars. And then I think another place to get a marketing win is Twitter Spaces. And I haven't done as much, but I think it's growing, and that's LinkedIn Audio, because now you
Mm,
can get, in a sense, on a virtual stage where you don't even have to be camera ready,
yeah.
and you can have conversations, and that is going to also be another place. And you can set your own space up, and you could say, hey, I'm going to talk about whatever, and the people that are interested are going to see that and they're going to come there. And so I think that's where, if we want to call it live audio, I think is really powerful. I think, but the benefit of, say, Twitter and LinkedIn is you already have a huge network, where with Clubhouse, you're still trying to figure out where people are. And I know people still use Clubhouse, but I really think that for me, I would rather already be on a platform where I know most of
Mhm.
the people I'm connecting with. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to that. Yeah, really for me, the number one thing I try to get people to do is engage, because even sometimes, and I don't know if you ever run across this, Valerie, you'll create a post, you'll tag a person, you're kind of like even giving them in a way a shout out. And it's like crickets. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, "Well, yeah, I'm trying to help you here.
Yeah.
Help me help
Help me
you."
help you.
And then they
Oh,
say, well, I really don't get much out of the social media. It's like, it's because you have to,
you gotta
it's
put something
social
back
media,
in.
right?
Yeah. Let's
Social,
socialize.
right.
Well, Jim, if people want to socialize with you online and they want to get more from you than they got just here in our conversation today, where's the best spot for people to check you out?
Well, I would say my two favorite places would be LinkedIn, and just look for Jim Fuhs. I don't know if I'm the only one, but if you, that's my, actually my URL, right, is /Jim Fuhs. And then on Twitter, it's Fusion Marketing, but it's spelled a little weird. FUHSIONMKTG is my handle on Twitter. And then, of course, if you want to check out what we're doing over on Amazon, the easiest way is just go to dealcasters.shop to see our storefront, or .live if you want to see our latest live show. And you can also go to timandjim.live if you want to see all the Tim and Jim shows, including the episode with the wonderful Valerie Morris.
Well, thanks, Jim. I'll make sure that we link to all of those spots in the show notes, so it's really easy for people to find all of your different platforms and different content that they can consume. And just thanks so much for sharing with us today and sharing such amazing wisdom. It was really fun for me just to hear a little bit more about your background and learn a few new things about you as well, and just be encouraged to get out there and make some content, in even if it's not perfect, even if it's rusty, but with the hope that each time you do it, it'll get better and better. And each time you engage, you'll get more authentic and more authentic. So thanks so much.
Thank you as well. It's great to be here.
If you liked what you just heard, please hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of our future episodes. And while you're at it, go ahead and leave us a review. That not only helps us out, but it helps others discover great interviews just like this one.